This is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 299, How to Sell with NLP, an interview with Paul Ross.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers. And around the year 2000, maybe 1999, I met a guy who was studying NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. He was an amateur enthusiast. How he explained it to me, it seemed like a variety of tricks with words and touching elbows and some kind of way of motivating, persuading, and what they called suggest people to do something. I wasn't particularly impressed, and I never thought much about it, little knowing that I would become a sales guy 3 years later. And there I would hear people talk about pattern interrupts and anchoring and hypnotism and all kinds of things and all kinds of terms to move people to take action and to buy your stuff. It all seemed very hazy and sketchy to me, and it still did today. I never bumped into anything that was very concrete. Always interested, about 3 years ago, I had an expert come on to the podcast, and I interviewed them on the topic, and they didn't do a very good job of explaining it. I never published the episode. So I'm excited to finally find a guest this week who actually understands the science behind NLP, and that guest is Paul Ross. How to use NLP when selling? That's the topic for this week. So, with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Paul. Are you ready to babble?
I am ready to babble.
Awesome. Paul, really excited to have you on here because I've been looking to have a guest to talk about neuro-linguistic programming for a long time. And I haven't bumped into anybody. And the goofy thing about NLP is first off, I don't know much about it. The second thing is people talk about it as if it's something everybody should know. At the same time, I have struggled to find somebody who's willing to actually talk about it.
Most people don't know what they're talking about who are willing to talk about it.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised, right? It's the Tao thing, right? Those who say don't know and those who don't know don't say, right?
So. No, I don't think that's the case. I think it's the case that most people who do NLP are too thick to really get the conceptual understandings and the model of the founders. And they're just rotely imitating monkey see, monkey do. And without understanding the power of the tools are not going to be powerful. That's what I think is really going on.
Well, great. Then you're the right guy. So why don't we start with the foundation of what is neuro-linguistic programming?
All right. There's an old joke that if you put two rabbis in a room, you get 15 opinions. If you put two NLPers in a room, you get 15 opinions. And they'll try to put it in hypnotic language. Here's my definition. And understand that anything I say today is not true with a capital T. It's only my map, my model. It's worked for me. It's worked for tens of thousands. And that's literally true. Students of mine from every walk of life all over the world. Here's my fundamental model of NLP. First and foremost, it is a map, a technology to model human genius, to model human excellence. So Richard Bandler and John Grinder, and to an extent, Frank Pulsacek, I don't know how to pronounce his name, a couple other people set out to study very powerful and effective psychotherapists, therapists who could get results with the most impossible clients. And one of them they set out to study was Dr. Milton H. Erickson, MD, who was a psychiatrist and also a hypnotherapist. Erickson, in my mind, was to hypnosis what Mozart was to music or Einstein was to physics. He totally revolutionized the field. So Bandler was a mathematician, Grinder a linguist, and they went and they studied the language patterns of Dr. Erickson. And from that, they extracted out a model of hypnosis. And so NLP fundamentally is that modeling technology that lets you look at someone who's excellent at something and copy it. The second thing I think NLP is, it's a way of using language to structure consciousness, shape decisions, and drive behavior. It is the study of how language does that. That's where I come in. That is my specialty. Teaching people how to use their language to shape decisions and drive behavior. Because here's the number one lesson I'd like to give to everyone listening to me right now. This is just my model, my map. You're never selling your product or service. You're always selling decisions and good feelings about decisions. I'll say it again. You're never selling your product or service. You're always selling decisions and good feelings about decisions.
I once had a guy on the podcast say something along the lines that there's actually two decisions when you're purchasing something. There's the decision that you've decided to purchase something, and there's the time when you actually pull the trigger. That's how he saw it.
I would say the biggest decision you have to sell your client or prospect on is that they can trust themselves to make a good decision. I'm not trying to be funny there. I think nowadays the biggest challenge, it used to be know, like, and trust. We've all heard that. For sales, you have to have know, like, or trust. That's true. But nowadays, you have to get your prospects to trust that themselves, that they can make a good decision. Because what used to be good decisions, for example, buying real estate and that your bank will always be trustworthy, there was a period of time where that was no longer true. And your clients have a legitimate mistrust of institutions. And not only that, your clients are checked out. It's not just a matter of trust, it's a matter of being checked out. They're so overwhelmed, so overstimulated. It doesn't matter if they're 15 or 50, everyone's got their face buried in their smart device. There's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook instant messaging, texting. You get my point. So you have to gain your prospects' trust in their own ability to make decisions, and you've got to get them checked in. You've got to get them focused. Don't assume your client is coming to you, even if they want to believe in you. Even if your prospect wants to believe you, don't assume that they're checked in enough to continue to focus on what you have to say. Go to any sales event, go to any speech, any talk, and you will see a lot of people texting. Even if your client or prospect isn't texting because their phone is off, mentally they're doing about the same thing a great deal of the time. So how do we create that focus? The big thing that I teach is instead of thinking about your product or service, think first, what is the state of consciousness and the states of consciousness I want my client or prospect to be in as I make my presentation, as I guide them through the selling process.
That's an odd thing to say.
Well, thank you. I hope I'm odd. If I'm saying what everyone else is saying, then there's no value in listening to me.
Yeah, and I have your book here. Oh, by the way, I should have mentioned that. I have your book in your hand. Subtle Words That Sell, How to Get Your Prospects to Convince Themselves to Buy and Add Top Dollars to Your Bottom Line.
That's correct.
There's a picture of you, handsome guy.
Thank you. I agree.
So I would think, instead of figuring out what the state of their consciousness would be, what I would commonly do is to qualify them by asking them questions, discovery questions, to find out, are they qualified to purchase my services or not?
That's fine. There's no way. It's not an either or. It's both. Absolutely true. No problem with qualifying them. And once you've qualified them, you still have to get them checked in. You still have to guide them into a state where they trust their own ability to make a good decision. I get it. Absolutely qualify them. I never said you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I was actually looking for that and never quite found that. I've found that the more I get them to talk, the more likely they are to buy. The more that they're able to express what their issues, what their problems, their concerns, their desires, aspirations. And then the more I listen, the more they go, wow, it seems like Pat's got my back. Maybe this guy is the right guy to buy.
Right. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with getting them to talk, but you have to get them talking in the right direction. If they're talking about how other people screwed them over or about they're not sure or et cetera, that's not necessarily the most useful conversation.
Well, I totally agree with you. Totally agree.
And I can get people talking, but first I want to give the appearance or at least the illusion that I understand exactly where they're already at. Now you're thinking, what exactly does that mean? So let me unpack it. If I said to you, if I were presenting, for example, some kind of financial opportunity, business in a box or whatever, and I said, before I make this presentation to you today, I know you're really going to love it because I'm going to show you how to make that extra $50,000 a month so you can buy that luxury yacht you've always wanted to impress your friends. Well, the problem is it's too specific. They may not want that. But if I said something along the lines of, before we begin this exploration of this opportunity together today, I just want to say, I'm not sure at which point you'll stop and think to yourself, wow, this is something I really want to explore further. But as it's taking place, can I ask that you promise one thing? Will you promise me you'll share the questions that naturally arise when a great decision is being made? Now, that is a big mouthful, but I'm not saying anything specific. When you're vague, here's the principle. When you're artfully vague, your prospect will fill in the blanks for themselves, and they will get the sensation, the cognition that you're speaking exactly to them. This is important on one-to-many sales conversations. When you're talking to a large group of people, it's next to impossible to specifically hone in on what each and every person wants. So speaking generally and vaguely like that, you can actually, within the first 2 or 3 minutes, as odd as that languaging sounds, you can give people the appearance or the illusion, if you will, and I'll use the word illusion, that you are speaking exactly and only directly to them. Knowing when to be vague and when to be specific is a very, very powerful skill set. A very powerful skill set.
I could see that in a one-to-many. Like if it's in a B2B sale, I got a bunch of people around the table. I could see making that statement. I think I've done that.
And I'm even talking about selling from the stage. If you're doing, that's true, B2B, but also if you're selling from the stage, you want to make sure you're talking that way. But even let's walk it back for a second. Let's say you're presenting one-to-one. It's you and your client. Before I would even make the sales presentation, I would use what I call implied relationship words. I would say, before we explore this marketing plan together. Now, look at that. We together explore. That implies that there's, instead of saying, all right, now I'm going to show you our marketing plan. If you have any questions, please ask. Even saying, I'm going to show you the marketing plan, that's me doing something to you. When I say, before we explore our marketing plan together, that implies that it's a shared activity, that we have a relationship. Just by the minute they buy into that frame, they buy into that sentence, they buy into the
I like that. I like that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So those are some subtle words. When you talk about subtle words that sell, share, we, together, and even that when I say, will you promise me you'll ask the questions that naturally arise when a great opportunity is being presented. Share. Do we promise things to people who we don't trust? No. Do we share things with people we don't trust? No. So in the space of 2 sentences, you're reinforcing the idea that you have a trusting relationship. Then the facts, figures, and data are going to be received through that mental filter, unconscious filter of feeling like they're in relationship with you. So they're much more likely to be believed.
Interesting. So what's the next step?
The next step in the selling process?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking me?
Right.
Well, obviously, you're going to handle any questions that come up, any objections that come up. And that's my favorite part, by the way, handling objections. I have 5 different ways of doing it that no one, I think, has ever heard of before. My sound just shifted.
Before we go into the objection handling, I'm of the notion of like, if I ask them what their troubles are, if I go into a deeper discovery what their issues are, right? So I would say like, Paul, you wanted me to visit you for a reason because you mentioned you had this issue. I would like to hear more about that. Tell me more about that. Tell me a lot more. And I make a whole big list of all that you mentioned. Then it's pretty easy to say, as you walk through, as you start showing a solution, start showing a solution.
Here's the challenge with that.
All right.
The challenge with that, see, that is a model of selling that can work. Let's make it work even better. The challenge with that is you could create, if you don't do it correctly, listen to me carefully, please. If you don't do it correctly, you could just install more doubt in them. They start talking about their challenges. Now their challenges are more real to them. Their doubts are more real to them than anything you might say to them. So you have to be very careful. I understand what you're saying.
Oh, see, I kind of like that. I kind of like getting them. I kind of like getting them, talking 20, 30 minutes when you meet somebody about what their issues are. Then they're all juiced up and angry and ready to like do. Then they're motivated to make a decision.
I totally agree with you in a sense. And what I'm trying to tell you is oftentimes, no matter how you probe, they're not going to know what their true objections are. They're just not going to know.
I get that. I get that. As you get through this, you get down at the bottom, and you say, you said you had this, this, and this, and I go tick, 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 tick. We tick them off, and I go, so what do you think? Think this is a good fit? And they're going to say, if any of you will say no. Well, why is that? Then some other objection is going to come up. But I've probably gotten through 80% of them.
See, my way of dealing with objections is what I call pattern interrupts.
Okay.
This is another, because you asked about NLP, a powerful tool in NLP.
You hear
is the
people
pattern
talk about this. Why don't you define this term?
I will. So people think and behave in predictable and fixed patterns. This is just hardwired into the brain. If we had to stop and think about every decision and think it through, if we had to think every time opening the refrigerator, how to open the refrigerator, if we had to stop and think every time we turned on the light, we wouldn't get anything done. So people behave in fixed patterns of behavior, thinking, feeling, acting. That's the first understanding. And Bandler and Grinder, the co-founders of NLP, got this from watching Milton Erickson. He would interrupt clients' patterns, and the clients would become very suggestible. So when you interrupt the pattern, you create what I call a mind stutter. The person's mind temporarily stutters and goes on hold, and they become suggestible and leadable. I'll give you an example. If someone says to me, I need more time to figure it out, a typical response might be, well, what is it that I can help you with so you can move forward right now? Or et cetera, et cetera. My response might be something like, have you ever taken a long time to think something over and it still turned out to be the wrong decision? Now, immediately, that's what I call a counterexample. Immediately, their mind is going to go, oh, yeah. And then I follow it through with, maybe it's not about time, but about the clarity you need to understand you can move forward today. So thinking about it just like that, what do we need to clear up to make sure you feel good about moving ahead? So you interrupt their pattern, they don't know where to go, and you get the real issue out on the table, which usually is confusion or clarity or trust, one of those.
All right.
You have to understand, or you don't have to understand, but one thing that will assist you in understanding my approach is it's pretty radically different. A lot of my ideas, when people first hear them, they have three possible responses. One response is, oh, that's not so far from what I'm already doing, so what? The second response is, that's a little out there, but I can see myself taking it on. But the far more common response to, I would say, 70% of what I teach is, wait a minute, that is so off the wall, off your rocker, outer space kind of stuff. I can't ever see yourself doing it. And what I'll put back to that, what I will address that statement, how I'll address it, what I'll speak into is, it's the very ways of thinking, feeling, and acting and responding that stand so far outside of what you're used to doing that bear the potential of bringing you the results that are so far outside of what you're used to enjoying. You can't improve on a paradigm if you're stuck inside of it. So my way of thinking is pretty radically out there and different, but that's actually where what brings it its leverage, because it is so different and it is so non-traditional.
Interesting. So I had interrupted you, but there wasn't a pattern to that. You said you had 5 ways of overcoming objections.
Yes, I do.
You want to share those?
Oh, it'll be a long broadcast if I share all of those. One of them is...
You just give them their names so we could see.
Oh, okay. One is something called agreement frames. Another is called meaning reframes. Another one is what I call the of course frame. And the final one is compare and contrast. I'll give you an example from one of them.
Okay.
If someone says your commission is too high,
yes.
One of the compare and contrast answer to that is, with the right agent, you're not paying a commission, you're investing in skills. That's a compare and contrast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or the issue isn't my commission, the issue is your financial gain. At the end of the day, you're not going to get that with anyone but a trained professional. And that kind of person would never sell themselves short, would they?
So I look at that. The first thing I think of is, that's an ROI question.
Yes, without saying it directly. That's correct. See, here's the thing. Whatever I can get my prospect to imagine for themselves will be perceived by them as being their own thought, and therefore will not be resisted. So as far as possible, as is possible, I want them to have the thought for themselves. I want to imagine it for themselves. I could absolutely say, well, that's because I've yet to show you the ROI where it's clear to you.
Right. So bad on me.
That.
Let me explain it. Let me explain this better, because you totally got a great. I totally agree with your thought there. That's how I would approach something like that.
Yeah, I get it. The thing is, they're used to hearing it. Your tactic identified as a tactic disarmed. And nowadays, it's a paradox. I say that your prospects are both dumbed down and sophisticated. They're dumbed down because of media and TV and smart devices, but they're also sophisticated because they've been pitched to so many times. So I get that whole ROI thing, but they've heard it before in the way that I just phrased it and the way that you would phrase it.
Mm-hmm.
They've heard it before.
Yeah.
This is one of the things. They've heard it before. They've heard it before. Tag questions. One of the things in my book says, are you tired of the same worn out sales scripts, assumed closes, tag questions, and other stale nonsense that just doesn't work, insults your prospect's intelligence, and makes you feel like a schmuck? And I think insulting your prospect's intelligence, even though they're dumbed down in some sense, they are also more sophisticated. There's a paradox there. And when you see a paradox, you know that the current way of thinking about things is being stretched to its breaking point, and there's a different way of viewing things that needs to be looked at, that needs to be created. I look for paradox because paradox tells me the current paradigm, the current way of seeing things is about to break or needs to be stepped beyond to get a fresh view.
Right. Well, I agree. I'm all about the paradox. I'm a Taoist at heart, right?
Yin and yang, good for you.
Yeah. The harder you push, the more they push back, right? It's actually the paradox of that. The less you push, the more they lean in.
Correct.
Yeah, I found that in selling. Well, why don't you give us one more example on one of your objections?
Okay, we can do something called, well, there's meaning reframes, there's agreement frames. I love the of course frame. The of course frame works something like this. Let's say you're going to make a sales call and the business person says, we already have a vendor.
Yep.
The of course frame would be, of course you do, or you wouldn't be in this business that you're committed to daily improving.
Absolutely. Good answer.
That's a really good answer. So now you've just made the very reason they're giving to not listen to you, the reason why they must listen to you.
Oh, that's a good one.
There are many different examples of course frames.
I like that.
I learned to use that one when I got the objection that, I have a boyfriend.
Oh, well, of course you do. You're cute. Why wouldn't you have one?
Of course you do. Of course you do. You don't need to convince me someone else finds you attractive in order for me to be interested.
What other things in NLP are we skipping? That I know this is like this. In fact, I feel dumb asking this question. It's such a probably deep well. But in the few minutes we have left here, what are a couple other things you want to share with the listeners to pique their interest?
State control. Controlling your own state, having the right attitude and the right beliefs, and using language to empower yourself. That sounds like a airy-fairy thing, but I'm going to cut it down and bring it down to the ground, the street fight level, as it were. I'll give you an example of using language, reusing language in a powerful way. Over and over I hear, I don't like making cold calls. Well, that's a bad metaphor. First of all, it's not literally true. The phone isn't cold. It's not 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The person you're calling isn't 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Instead of cold calls, I say opportunity outreach. How many opportunity outreaches am I going to extend today? Now, at first, that may seem a little bit woo-woo, but think about it. What's the difference between making a cold call and doing an opportunity outreach? One has to do, you're trying to get something from someone. The other is you're offering value to the other person. So that's an example of what we call reframing using language and reframing using metaphor. Another one, there are a lot of people out there who just don't like the word sales. They don't like thinking of themselves as a salesperson. So I say, fine, you're not a salesperson. You're a decision service technician. You're being of service to people to make good decisions. So part of NLP, a skill set of NLP, is reframing using language, changing the beliefs and attitudes and the languaging of something to set people free rather than their world is frozen. You're going to free that world. You're going to turn that stumbling block into a stepping stone through the use of metaphor, which I'm using right there. There's not literally a stumbling block. There's not literally a stepping stone. So the effective use of metaphor and languaging to increase people's talent, increase people's sense of possibility. And then building state. How do you get into the right state to do selling? And I say the right state to do selling is not a state where you're bouncing up and down with enthusiasm or any of the rest of it. Because if your client or prospect is not in that state, you're just going to turn them off. I say the best state to be in is one that's pretty much neutral and compassionate. There's a difference between compassion and empathy. Compassion says, I care about you. I care about your outcome. You are under my influence, so you're also under my protection and my guidance. Empathy is, I'm going to feel everything that you feel right along with you. So if you're in rapport with your client starts feeling nervous, and you start feeling nervous because you're empathetic, now you're going to set up a very bad feed-forward loop where you're each feeding each other's anxiety. That's going to blow the sale right out of the water. So a big part of NLP is learning to use language to reframe your sense of possibility, and then it has to do with state control, finding the right states and designing them in. That's a matter of what you visualize, what you do with your body and breath. Often for me, the best interventions when I work with people are not cognitive, but rather what they do with their breathing and where they put their attention on and in their body. But other than that, NLP is a giant study. I've been doing it for 30 years. It would take like a weekend. It would take a weekend to thoroughly take people through it.
You mentioned hypnosis earlier. Has it got anything to do with that?
There is an NLP model of hypnosis based on the work of Dr. Erickson, as I said. We have to define our terms. If you think of hypnosis as a guy in a top hat and tails, and he's sending magnetic vibes through his fingertips,
which I do.
Okay, that's Hollywood. That's no more true than Dracula, or when you call the police. Excuse me. What is that show? CSU. CSU is not going to. CSI. The crime.
Yeah.
They're not going to show up to your door when you call 911. To me, hypnosis is just a tool set to create a state of consciousness where your sense of possibility is expanded, you're totally focused, and new ideas can be presented to your mind where they're accepted in a way that can be tried out without the old ways of thinking getting in the way. That's all it is. It's not a thing where you're going, I don't even use the metaphor. When I do hypnotic work with people, I don't use the metaphor of deep. You're going deeper, deeper, deeper. You're sleeping. That to me is a old way of understanding things. It can work, but it's not the most effective way of doing things, and it certainly isn't modern or up to date.
Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed reading this book.
Thank you.
A lot of the phrasing in here I liked because I kind of use it anyway. I remember you said you had there's 3 sets of people. I'm set number 1.
Oh, good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
But I tell you, my struggle with this book is that a lot of the focus was placed on the power of word, which is different from how I focus on the idea of, can I help this client? Do I have what it takes to help them? And if I don't, maybe I know somebody that does, or maybe they're not qualified, right?
I don't see the either or of it.
Oh, but the thing is, I think if I have that feeling in mind, like I'm going to help them, the words kind of come, as opposed to kind of memorizing the words in the script, which I kind of feel like this book is like, or maybe I'm not getting this at all, which is why I'm honestly sharing this with you.
Oh, that's fine. That wasn't I didn't hear a complete sentence there or a complete question, but I'll address what I thought I heard. There's nothing wrong with being clever or crafty in the service of a decision that helps your client and yourself. This is about being clever and crafty in the service of your clients. And I don't think there's anything wrong in being structured and in being prepared, and even in some senses rehearsed. And the way in which these words are used are unique. I don't think you've seen any sales quote scripts, and they're only examples of what works. They are examples of what works. I have to have I can't just have the abstract ideas, which I also have. I have the concepts. I also have to have some specific examples. They're examples of how the languaging works, so people can turn around and create their own examples, understanding the basic principles. And what I see in the thinking of two of your questions is you're thinking disjunctively, to be more accurate, to bring that word down to the ground.
I wouldn't be surprised. That sounds like something I would be.
It's an either or frame. You either are in service to the client or you're using words. It's an either or frame you're bringing in. And I'm saying, instead of thinking of it as an either or, with all due respect, think of it as an and. You can do both. Usually when clients come to me with an either or, it's something on their map that can be expanded. Is light a particle or a wave? Well, it's something that behaves like both. It's not an either or. It's something that can behave like both, depending on how it's measured. So it's not an either or. I get where you're coming from, and I appreciate the attitude of being in service.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying too, because I do believe there is power in using certain phrases at exactly the right time, but you need to be mindful when you're doing it by being totally present to the moment when you're talking to your prospects. So I can see what you're saying. Challenge. It's an and, so that's an and there, right? I get that.
Yeah, and that's an NLP idea, by the way. In the beginning, you're going to sound rehearsed. In the beginning, see, here's the 3 NLP stages of learning. This is the NLP theory. It's not science. It's not true with a capital T. It's not a fact with a capital F. There's unconscious incompetence, where you don't even know that you're doing something wrong. There's conscious incompetence, where you know you're doing something wrong. There's conscious competence, where you're practicing. And then finally, there's unconscious competence, where you don't even have to think it through.
Right.
So you have to go through those stages, and you have to be willing to step your foot into not only outside of your comfort zone, but to get my work, you have to step outside your concept zone, your conceptual zone. If you can't step outside your conceptual zone, and if you can't stop and find the idea of new ways of learning and new learnings to be exciting, it's like throwing a marshmallow at a tank.
Right.
To make real progress, you need to step outside of your conceptual zone. Just stepping out of your concept, out of your comfort zone with ideas that don't work or that are antiquated isn't going to get you very far.
Before we leave, if you were to give our listeners one piece of advice they could take action on this week, what would that be?
One piece of advice they could take action on. It's self-serving to tell them to get my book.
Oh, we're going to tell them that in a second.
I would say be mindful of how your language shapes your decisions and drives your behavior. Just be mindful of the things you say to yourself and how it structures your sense of possibility, how it either shuts you down or opens you up. Be mindful of it. Keep a journal and write down the kind of self-thoughts you have. And then next to each one say, is this opening me up or shutting me down? And you'll be surprised to see how much of it is shutting you down.
I totally agree. People want to find you online, Paul. Where would they go?
So there are 2 things you can do. You can go to speakerpaulross.com. That's speakerpaulross.com. Or if you want a downloadable copy of my book, a free e-copy that you can get right away, text the word subtle, all in capital letters, SUBTLE, to the number 76626. That's the word subtle, to the number 76626, and you can get a downloadable, instantly downloadable free e-copy of my book. Subtle Words.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's really great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for being a challenging interviewer. I like it. It brings me to the very best of me.
I hope I've been challenging. I've just been trying to understand.
No, I have no problem. Challenging is a good thing. I love being challenged. It's a sign that my ideas are impacting the other person, and that's a good thing.
No, this has been great. This is what I was looking for.
Good.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for babbling with us here on Sales Babble.
You're most welcome, Pat.
Well, Sales Babblers, I hope you really enjoyed that interview. I know it was a little noisy at times. There were sirens in the background and all that. I'm not sure exactly where Paul lives. I know it's someplace in San Diego, so I apologize for that. I'm used to having a higher quality sound, so I really appreciate that you bared with us, and here you are all the way at the end listening. To get a copy of his book, you can get it for free, The Subtle Words That Sell, How to Get Your Prospects to Convince Themselves to Buy and Add Top Dollars to Your Bottom Line. Yeah, you can get that book for free. You can text him I've got the notes to that in the show notes at www.salesbabble.com/299. I got a really, really terrific email last week from Dr. Sean Green. He was a guest on this podcast, and he really liked Marianne Renner's interview. And he said the conversation was excellent, as was your lead up to it as well. Thank you so much for all the time you put into Sales Babble. Wasn't that nice of him? Wasn't that sweet? Yeah, I really appreciate it. Are there any comments or questions that you've got about Sales Babble? If so, don't hesitate to reach out. All you got to do is send me an email or reach out to me on LinkedIn or go to the homepage at salesbabble.com and click the Babble Me button. That's all I got for this week. Next week is a big, big, big week. Neil Christensen's coming in, and we're going to do the top 10 tools for 2020. These are tools that we used this past year. In fact, I had to prune my list down. It's going to be a ton of fun. This is where we drink beer in front of the fireplace here in Sales Babble Studio, and you're going to get some really cool tools that are going to improve your life immensely next year. That's all I got for this week. Until next week, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.